Welcome to a rambling discussion from a bearded man who enjoys comic books and loves to nitpick and complain about things. Today we're going to look at Marvel vs. DC. But Benny, in the title you put the problem with. As a matter of fact, you titled it Marvel vs. DC, comma, the problem with. Yes, I did that because I wanted you to know that this video is going to be in the same vein as the problem with videos, but I don't have an inherent problem. And I guess that's the problem with. So I've been doing, actually, hold on, before we can get to that, cut to that ad roll, because we got a blender today! Today's video is sponsored by Blendjet and their new Blendjet 2 limited edition Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem Collection. Whether you're a smoothie person or enjoy having a tasty protein shake before your workout, this blender is going to be a great fit for you. Especially now with their super cool Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem Collection. These blenders have a leak-proof lid, a detachable jar with measurements, 6 stainless steel blades, and a rechargeable base, and more. It also comes with a recipe book with tons of recipes that just look delicious, and I plan to try them. I don't know about you, but growing up, I always wanted to be one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Leo was one of my favorites because he got awesome swords, and he's probably the coolest character, and this blender brought me back the nostalgia of those days because of the fun Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle design. So be sure to check them out and get one of the 2 limited edition TMNT collectible designs, and you can click my exclusive link to get 12% off. Check out Blendjet's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles blender, and then go check out Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem in theaters now. So let's go into what the actual problem with Marvel vs. DC is. It doesn't matter. Now, I wanted to do this video because I wanted to have a much more positive video than I have had recently. You guys are asking for positive topics, but there's a comment I get a lot on this channel. The issue I have with that is that I'm pretty openly for both companies, and I think that's actually a problem to be constantly pitting Marvel versus DC. What I'd like to do today is go over what the differences between Marvel and DC are, explain my stance on Marvel versus DC, and I'm actually going to tell you the story of why does Benny have a DC tattoo that we all see all the time? There's actually a reason for that. So let's kick it off right at the beginning. What do I prefer? I've never openly really stated this because I've never felt I needed to. I prefer both Marvel and DC, and there's a reason for that. The number one reason is that DC and Marvel don't give 2 craps about whether or not you like them over the other one. I've never understood brand loyalty to that level of wanting to be like, I only read Marvel, screw whatever DC's doing. It goes all the way back to when I was a kid and there was the Coke versus Pepsi argument. Yes, there is a taste preference, but why are we going to war over Pepsi versus Coke when Pepsi and Coke don't give 2 craps about us? Back when I was a kid, the big argument was always PlayStation versus Xbox. And you know which one I played? I just mowed a ton of lawns and bought both and just got whatever exclusive I wanted to play. I've never understood that brand loyalty, and that holds today for me with Marvel and DC. Now, I'm sure a lot of you agree with me with that, but you still have a preference. And there's a reason why you probably have a preference, and that's the way Marvel and DC do everything that they do. So the basic idea between Marvel and DC, and the thing that really makes them both stand out, is a core concept. When you think of DC, you think of gods among us. And yes, I know it's a tagline in Injustice, but that's pretty much how DC functions. DC is pretty much about the Justice League and a lot of its ancillary characters that are better than you and me. A rich billionaire who's able to buy and sell and do whatever he wants, who's adopted multiple teenage youths and taught them how to fight crime, all having access to his insane amount of money. It's about an alien who has come down to Earth and is trying to learn to be human. It's about a goddess from Themyscira, or not a goddess, depending on which timeline we're talking about Wonder Woman. But generally, she's pretty much a goddess. Pretty much. Not like always on the cusp. You get what I'm saying. Like demigod, I think is the proper terminology. We're talking about a guy that can go into space and create things with his ring. We're talking about a guy that can break the sound barrier because he wanted to go and get a burger in London. Although, why would you go to London for a burger? Let's just say the Flash went for fish and chips. That makes far more sense. But when you think of Marvel, you don't think of these guys that are above us and trying to be us. Instead, you think of Spider-Man, who's always down on his luck, always doesn't have a dollar, and he's always just webbing around New York. Spider-Man is someone you could be. You think of the X-Men, who are being just pushed to the side and basically racially profiled because they have powers. And to this day, I've never understood being racist against the X-Men. I'm sorry, but if a guy can just heal from anything I do and can pop claws out of his hands, I'm not going to be racially throwing things at his head. I'm going to be completely avoiding him because he could murder me. I don't think it works the same level that people like to compare it to. Like, oh, it's just like the civil rights movement. Right, but the civil rights movement didn't have people that could blow up your brain with telepathy. But that's a different argument for a different day. The allegory is there and it works. I'm just saying, when you give the X-Men those insane powers, it doesn't work on the same level. It's about Captain America, a guy who's really strong. That's really what Super Soldier Serum boils down to. He's just an Olympic level athlete. Now, yes, he's done some crazier things, and as time has gone on, he's gotten more effective. But the point I'm making is Marvel's characters are more street level characters than we have over at DC, while DC is characters that are bigger and better than us. That's the point of DC characters. Whenever Marvel tries to do a DC character like Sentry, Hyperion, or even Blue Marvel, it doesn't really work as well. They don't work in that universe of street level characters or characters that we could strive to be. Vice versa, whenever DC tries to do a street level character, they're either a clone of Batman or you don't know they exist. I'm sorry, Green Arrow, it's what you started as. But that breaks it down to Marvel versus DC. We all love to make fun of the copycat characters that Marvel made for DC heroes, or vice versa, that DC has made for Marvel. But they don't have the same. If I want to read a story about Spider-Man, there is no DC equivalent. And if I want to read a Batman story, there is no Marvel equivalent. So Marvel versus DC is kind of dumb. As a matter of fact, and we have the videos on the channel if you want to watch them, but in the actual comic, Marvel versus DC, the DC editors and writers and Marvel editors and writers didn't pick the winners. They just let you guys pick. It was a big vote. And that's how the winners were decided with that. Because at the end of the day, these characters don't mesh up very well. Now, if you want to go deeper into it, DC itself, I personally feel, is more of a cohesive universe. That doesn't mean they always do that. They also like to do the branching universe kind of a thing. But in my opinion, more often than not, DC is a cohesive universe centered around the Justice League. The Justice League has Batman, Superman, Flash, Green Lantern, all these characters on it. And then they branch down into their families. And we have a lot of crossover things, like Nightwing teaming up with the Flash, or the Green Lantern teaming up with Green Arrow, or Batman teaming up with everybody and just being grumpy. While over in Marvel, the intercompany crossovers are fewer and far between unless your name is Wolverine. Wolverine's in everything. We can just admit that. As soon as they brought him back, you want to know something funny? It was last week. I think it was last week or this week. One of these 2 weeks, Wolverine is currently involved in the Fall of X. He has 2 Versus books that came out in the same week. Versus Spider-Man and Versus Ghost Rider. Neither book is in the Fall of X. They're just making Wolverine crossover. But what I'm saying is, traditionally, you have the Avengers house, you have the X-Men house, and then you have the Spider house. They don't actually cross over that much. Now, you can have a number of reasons behind that, and a lot of it is the legalities of it. Like, they didn't want the X-Men to be more a part of the larger Marvel universe because of the Fox deal before, Disney bought that. And just like they don't want to introduce Spider-Man into a lot of things because anything introduced into Spider-Man, Sony apparently has. I don't know how true all that is. I'm not a legal guy. What are they called? Lawyers. I'm not one of them. So I can't tell you the exact legalities of that, but from what I understand, anything introduced into Spider-Man, Sony has a shot at. So they don't like introducing things in Spider-Man that are going to be used in Avengers or X-Men. And because of that, they don't want to cross Spider-Man over with these things, because let's say Spider-Man does go into the X-Men book and they introduce an X-Men, but he talks to Spider-Man just a little bit more than the X-Men, Sony could make the argument that that individual is a Sony property. And that's where a lot of problems, legalities come in. So Marvel feels more separated than DC does. That's, once again, not to say DC hasn't gone through its periods where it feels like everyone's off doing their own thing, but generally DC is all one big story. Like right now, they're all dealing with night terrors, they're all dealing with the Titans taking over, and they're all reflecting on that and they're all referencing it. While over in the Marvel world at the moment, Fall of X is happening, and we are just making new books so that we can reference it. It's not being referenced directly in other books, such as Uncanny Avengers is how Captain America is going to be involved in the situation, and Deadpool's going to be involved in the situation, because we're not going to reference it in Deadpool or in Captain America. So that's kind of how Marvel does things, as opposed to DC. So again, it comes down not to Marvel versus DC, But what kind of story do you want to read? Do you want to read street level characters that you could relate to that are kind of, they're in a big universe, but it's not quite as shared? Or do you want to read about guys that are aliens and bringing hope to the world and they're all a part of this big picture? It's all preference. It's a lot of people like to bring in manga because the way that manga does its storytelling is completely different from American superhero comic books. That's the exact thing with Marvel and DC. Now, again, before you all go down into the comments, they will always kind of do similar ideas to each other. But if you understand and read a lot of Marvel and DC, you will see the nuances that allows each company to stand out separate from the previous company. So now, of course, the question is, Benny, what is your preference? Do you like DC or do you like Marvel? I am a unique individual. I strive to kind of incorporate myself into anything that I find interesting. If you didn't know, and I don't know how you would because I don't really talk about it all that often, but I have about 20 different hobbies. So basically for me, if I find it interesting, I will deep dive into it. I can't help it. It's the hyperfixation of my ADHD. It's how I can tell you about the entire Assassin's Creed lore from the very first video game. I can tell you the plot to every single Final Fantasy. I know the location of every crafting and gathering material in Final Fantasy XIV, the MMO. It's also why I mountain bike, I cycle, I rock climb, I lift, I go skateboarding, I go snowboarding. I'm realizing how many hobbies I actually have at the moment. And I also every morning meditate and sketch. I'm not trying to brag the amount of things I have. As a matter of fact, most of you are probably like, holy cow, I'm exhausted just hearing what he does. And I'll tell you right now, if you were one of my friends, like Dan, you would also be exhausted because I drag you to as many things as I can until you're exhausted. But that also applies to things such as my fandoms that I'm a fan of, DC and Marvel. I mean, for the record, I know the deep diving lore of Zelda, but my fandom craze also applies to other things. I could tell you all of the story elements to Vampire Diaries. I know all of the ins and outs in fanfic versions of Twilight. I can tell you everything that's going on in the world of Sailor Moon, because even when I was 16, I would wake up in the morning and watch the Action Hour, which was Sailor Moon and Ronin Warriors, and I would watch these two shows, and that led to me wanting to know more. I just deep dive into every topic that I find interesting, and that applies to Marvel and DC. That's why I tell everyone I enjoy them both. I'll lean towards which one I'm liking more at the moment by reading more of that, but that doesn't change the fact, no matter what, I'm going to read Batman, I'm going to read Green Lantern, and I'm going to read Flash. And on Marvel, I'm going to read everything that says Wolverine, Spider-Man, and a lot of times I'll pick up a random book. Right now I'm reading Chip Zdarsky's Daredevil, although it just ended this week, so I guess I got to find a replacement. The point I'm making is I don't cover a lot of Marvel here, not because I don't enjoy it or because I don't read it. It's because you guys don't watch it. So at the beginning of Comicstorian, all the way back in the olden days of the beginnings of YouTube, why am I trying to sound like an old man? I'm Deckard Cain. I also know Diablo lore. Anyway, all the way back at the beginning of Comicstorian, I was doing a lot more DC. It wasn't because I was a bigger fan of DC. It's because of the way that Marvel structures its stories versus DC. So a point that I didn't bring up earlier is the way that these stories are structured. Marvel tries to go more in line with what manga does. Marvel will tell a never-ending story. If you read the current Wolverine storyline, the one that, if you read anything that doesn't get canceled at 12 issues, if you read the current Wolverine book, it's on issue 36. Wolverine is still referencing things that happened back in like issue 10 or 11. Dracula was the first arc, and Dracula wasn't resolved until like the middle teens. And in the middle of that, we were introduced to Maverick, and Maverick stuck around until the battle against Beast, which is what just resolved. Deadpool gets introduced in the Wolverine book to pop up in X-Force. But what I'm saying is, Marvel makes it difficult to find the clean story breaks. DC has always kind of written for graphic novels. So while Batman is doing an 8-issue spread and is going to be a contained storyline, he might reference other things, but there will be a clear ending to the arc. Recently, Chip Zdarsky just did Failsafe. Failsafe ended with Batman being teleported to the other universe. That graphic novel came out like 2 weeks afterwards. And then Chip Zdarsky told the story of Batman in the other Gotham and coming back home. And that story ended a month and a half ago because it ended right before Night Terrors, and I got the book in today. I pre-ordered it, but I got the book in today. Marvel does it a little differently. If you really want to get into a superhero at Marvel, it is more in line with manga. Case in point, Zeb Wells' Spider-Man. Zeb Wells' Spider-Man hit its first, conclusion at the end of 25-26, the death of Miss Marvel. Because that wrapped up everything that had just happened with Zeb Wells, and we can go into a new direction. So you have 25 issues that all come together over there. And for the record, elements that were brought up that weren't resolved are now being resolved. Doc Ock showed up around 17, 18 or something like that, and now that's being resolved. And then we have another element like Hobgoblin that got carried over into the Miles book. So what I'm saying is Marvel's more ongoing, which makes it difficult for me to find a video breakpoint. At the beginning of Comicstorian, we didn't do single issues or 2 issues or 3 issues. I would only do a story when it resolved, when it was completely done, which made it difficult for me to find a break in Marvel. So what happened is we did a lot of DC early on. This built up a pretty dedicated DC fan base, which is what a lot of you are. Which means that when I put out a Marvel video, it just doesn't do nearly as well as a DC video. So as a YouTuber, I need to pick what I'm going to do. Now, as Comicstorian's evolved, we've moved into doing single issues and 2 issues and 3 issues, and I'm still trying to pepper in 1 to 2 Marvel a week. Right now, it's Spider-Man related stuff. Following that, we've already got it planned out. I'm going to be doing 3 chapters of Wolverine so that you know what happened with Dark Beast and how it ties into the Fall of X. But what I'm getting at is that's why Comicstorian does more DC than it does Marvel. It's because early on, it was difficult to pick what I was going to break the video at, so we just went with the easy choice of picking a complete DC storyline. Also, early on in Comicstorian's life, we had a lot of books to pick from. And Marvel would be like, our story arc is 50 issues, and this DC one is 7. Well, for the sake of a workload when it was just me and one other guy, a 7-issue arc is far more enticing than the 50-issue arc because I didn't want to break them up early on. Which now brings us to the final question that I want to answer. Benny, if you are actually into both of them as equally as you say, why do you have a DC tattoo and no Marvel tattoo? This actually has nothing to do with DC. This is what I call my geek sleeve, okay? So my geek sleeve is pretty much anything that has been important to me in my childhood or now and has become something important to me in my life. These all represent different things in my life as opposed to what they're actually about, okay? The Justice League one is because the closest I've ever gotten to my dad is when we talk about comics. He's the one that got me into comics. I've said that before, but the first comic I ever read was Superman time and time again. He then got me into Armageddon 2001 with Wave Rider, and we talked about that together. So as Comicstorian was getting more and more popular and I wanted to get more tattoos, I dedicated this arm to important things that mean a lot to me on a more personal level. And DC means a lot to me on a personal level, not because they're DC, but because it's how I connected to my dad when I was a kid. We don't have a lot in common. It's pretty much cars and superheroes. So that's what I connected with them on. And Star Wars was a very similar situation. The bomb here is because I was near 11 explosions in the military. The Chocobo is because I met my wife on Final Fantasy 11. Star Wars, the lightsaber is the exact same thing as the front side. Batman is up here. That one is just Batman only because when I first got my first tattoo, that was a Monster symbol. That was the symbol of the energy drink Monster. They offered it to me for free and I took it. So as the years went on, I'm like, I got a goddamn Monster symbol on my arm and I want to get rid of it. So me and the tattoo artist that did all of this found something that would cover it. Okay? And it was a giant M and it was all black. So I had to find something. And you know what works? Black and blue toned Batman. But that's what that one is. And just for reference, this arm right here is all Final Fantasy 14 related because I've been with my wife now for 15 years and we met in Final Fantasy 11, which became Final Fantasy 14. On my right calf, I'm not going to go down there and show you my feet. I'm not a weirdo, but I have 2 dragons on there, Kieran for mountains and a water-based dragon. I got the name. It's really weird, but it's basically a water and a mountain dragon. And on my left leg is a bunch of Nintendo things because the earliest thing in my life that I really remember was my connection to my grandparents because both of my grandmothers connected to me by buying me video games, which early on was Nintendo themed stuff. So I have Metroid, Fire Emblem, Pokemon, all the stuff that reminds me of them. So that's it. That's why I have a DC tattoo. That's why Comicstorian does more DC, and that's my opinions on Marvel versus DC. The problem is, stop trying to find who's going to win. It doesn't matter if the MCU is good or the DCEU is good. It doesn't matter who's got the better video games. What it matters at the end of the day is who has good stories and great art. And that's what you should be looking for as a reader of comic books. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. You can find drinks and refreshments in the back. I believe we've got little beanie weenies. If you know what those are, let me know in the comments down below. And I will see you next time right here at Comicstorian. Don't forget to check out our blender brought to you today. I really should have brought it down here. And like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. And also, on honest question, if you like more of these discussions, not just me looking for something to nitpick and then make a video on it, but you want more honest discussions and opinions and things like that, let me know in the comments down below. Because I do like doing just spouting nonsense. This whole commentary thing I started doing here and at Mangastorian, go check out Mangastorian, I'm having a lot of fun with. And we're actually debating doing a commentary-based channel. So if you want to see more of just me talking like this, let me know. I'll see you guys next time.